As we've never done anything like this before, ever. We always try and share any information that we have at any race, at any track, to anybody who needs it, whatever car they have. And over the years, anything that we tell you here it's not like we've invented it. We've been told it by other people, so it's literally sharing the information across so everybody knows as much as possible. We try and apply a bit of logic to everything we know in terms of you can't change the rules in terms of like what happens to a car when you change your setup. It just varies depending on the car and the track and the situation. So from there we'll go on to the front roll bar.
Yeah, front roll bar, okay. Most cars have the front roll bar on a stiff setting. I think I've been around and looked at nearly every car. The reason for that is because you don't want the front, if it's too soft it will dig in. Cormac will explain more of that on the driving. But they're all adjustable, they all come in. I think 99% of the cars I've ever seen always have the maximum roll bar stiffness.
Yeah, the reason being is because if you have it too soft on the front, it's simply going to dig in on the front too much, and it's just going to roll into the front corner, and it's going to go into the corner, and the front's literally going to go, I'm taking all this grip, and the rear is usually going to go, oh, I have no grip, and your car's going to spin around. So normally, yeah, it's simple as that. You tend not to have to touch the front roll bar, you just have it as stiff as possible. Over the years, I know other car makes and the likes of RS5 and other cars, it used to be kind of 4mm, then it went to 5mm, and for example on the RS5 it's like 6mm. So you usually have it as hard as possible because you don't want to roll on the front roll bar of the car. And next is caster.
Right. Caster is something which a lot of you might know, but again we're trying to explain to people that don't know. But caster is a position of the top wishbones. The bottom wishbones are always fixed. Top wishbones can go forward or backwards. So you've got a number of settings. Normally you say 3, far forward, far back, or midway. Cormac will explain now what that does when you adjust the caster.
Yeah, when you adjust the caster, when you have, if you have, generally people have it in the middle. If you start from a middle point and you kind of have a decent enough steering, but if you go, okay, it's not enough general steering, then you will move it forward. Yeah, you'll push it forward. That way it's not necessarily steering coming into a corner, it's not necessarily steering coming out of a corner, it's more the general steering, because the way you break steering up is you always break the steering up into steering coming into a corner, steering going around the corner, and then steering coming out of the corner. And when you have that balance, that always allows for the best speed going around the corner, and caster only really affects the general steering. It doesn't really affect it coming into a corner, it doesn't really affect it coming out of the corner. Next step is camber, front camber.
Camber is basically the front wheels, okay? So we always advise people to start at the 0 point. And then if you're looking for less digging, Cormac explained, you can go positive. Now, it doesn't matter if you go positive more on one side than the other, really no odds. If you have a really bad circuit with no grip, you can always go negative to give you even more steering. But he'll explain that it classes initial steering for camber.
Yeah, on a circuit like Brookland, it's a huge example of where camber comes into play so heavily. Because a lot of the corners, 3 or 4 of the corners, the natural camber of that corner is either positive or negative. For example, you have the back corner where the camber is absolutely positive going into it, but then you have the corner by the wall that's just opposite the sweeper, where the camber is negative, so it pulls you away from the corner. So you always have to kind of give or take play around with that, and the way you get a feel of that on the track is if you're going around a corner and kind of towards the end of that corner you feel the car either pulling in or pulling out, that usually you go, okay, I think I need either positive or negative camber. And as Nick said, feel free to play around with it different on one side to the other, because as I said, most tracks are okay that you'll have a camber same on both sides, but on a track like Brookland, don't feel free to kind of go, okay, I'll have it positive by +1 on one side and positive +1.5 on the other side. Always feel free to play around with that, and don't be afraid to have a look. And as I said, it's more kind of initial steering and around the corner, and when you're coming out, if it's kind of either pulling in or pulling out, it means the camber is kind of set wrong because the wheel's automatically going, instead of it's going from kind of there to there around the corner, it's just going more into it and it's leaning in and it's just going to throw the rear out. Next is front toe out.
Front toe out. Now, front toe out really is essential for most cars, especially if you're running a single servo that's not maybe the most expensive, because the more toe out you have keeps your car in a straight line when you're going down the straight. A lot of the cars, like say for the minis, you're not throwing big money at, you've got a cheapest steering servo, it might not centre as good, so the toe out at the front will keep that car going straight. If you've got, like in here we've got a quite expensive, very high quality servos, our toe out would only be half of the toe out you'd need on a mini, and it would still go in a straight line. And that's really what the toe out does at the front.
It doesn't really affect much on the track, it's more just straight line speed and how kind of twitchy the car can feel down the straight. And yeah, that's why you have it more on the minis as well, because it's a shorter wheelbase. So you'll change it according to the shorter wheelbase because it will automatically have more steering.
Is it just tyre temperature? You get more tyre temperature if it's more toe
you would a little bit, yeah, but not, you're only talking a few mil. I mean, we don't go by degrees, but for example, most people run around about 122 mil toe out, but we're on 128.
What do you think that would be in about degrees?
We don't know, we don't work on degrees.
Do you measure between the front and the back tyre? Do you do that, or do you...
Well, for us, we measure off the chassis because that's
but it's the same as the rear toe out in terms of measure with the wheel against the angle. And next is shock position.
Yeah, shock position. Now, see, even on the minis, it has an adjustable shock position on the front. We have 4 holes, we've got 2. Now, basically, you can go higher or lower. The higher position gives you a more vicious steering effect, and the lower makes it softer. And again, it depends on the track conditions.
Yeah, shock position is a simple yet pretty effective way of trying and seeing how the car performance changes on a setup change. It's really essential that you be open to kind of changing it, because it's literally only unclipping, changing the position and putting it in and taking it back out on the track, and you don't have to do anything major. And as I said, you have a general shock position. If you move it down, you're going to have less initial steering coming into the corner, simply being because the front shocks are laid down more, so it's not as much angle coming into the corner. So it doesn't affect really general steering, it doesn't affect steering coming out of the corner. So never think, if you don't have enough steering coming out of the corner, never think, okay, I'll change the shock position, because it's not going to affect it coming out of the corner, it's only going to affect it coming into a corner. And also that plays into it in terms of general steering and the overall feel, as in you could have a steering where it's kind of got too much coming into a corner and not enough coming out, and if you change the shock position down, you will find where you will have less coming into a corner, but you'll actually have more coming out of a corner, because you're hitting the racing line that little bit better, because it's not digging in, it's just going around a smoothie, so you're hitting that line and the rears will just go with the front and you'll have more coming out of the corner. So always be open to changing the front shock position, because it's one of the simplest things you can do to check on car performance.
If you adjust that, does it have a difference to your straight line?
No.
Not at all?
It's simply steering coming into a corner. It might slightly affect the kind of bumpiness of the car and the general ride, but it's really simply only for steering coming into a corner, and that's it.
I mean, is everybody running the minis with the shocks in the top position? Has anybody tried it?
It's fixed on one position.
On the top, no one's actually gone on the inside.
Yeah, you should try it. It might, might make it better.
Well, I'll pull them out on the bottom.
Yeah,
you can
we
pull them out.
same
Yeah,
principle.
yeah. Just to soften it down.
You're talking about the front shocks. What difference would it make in the rear shocks?
When you change the rear shocks, we'll get to that later.
We're just doing the front of the car first.
We're just going from the front to the... No, it's okay. Always think about the questions you want to ask, and as you go along, if you want to ask.
A lot of things you've got to remember is if you're driving the car, and that's just a lot of this is experience, but if you've got a problem with the steering and it's too vicious, it will throw the back end of the car, and a lot of people think, oh, I've got no grip on the back. It can simply be that you've got you need more camber on the front to soften the steering, because the steering could be digging in and throwing the back out.
Yeah.
Whereas most people say, oh, the back's wrong, I need more grip. If you look at the front of the car instead, that might help back end.
Without going into it too much or diverting away from what we're talking about, I've said this a million times and I'll say it again. You are always looking for a balance between the front and the rear. That's all you're looking for on the track. You're simply looking for balance between the front and the rear on grip. When you have that balance, you can then tweak the car slightly to suit your driving style, to suit the track, and to suit the conditions. But you always want to first and foremost look for the balance between the front and the rear, because it's so crucial on the rest of the car.
And also an important thing is, especially when you're new to the hobby, if you've got a bit of time, come down here when the track's empty, take your car out, run it for 5-10 minutes, come back and do one adjustment, change your front shocks, nothing else, go straight back out and do another 5-10 minutes. You should be able to see what difference that's made.
Yeah.
Don't make 2 or 3 adjustments because you don't know what's working.
Yeah. Next is Ackerman angle.
Ackerman angle, yeah, that's something which
it's a little bit more, so to speak, complicated.
it's complicated, but it's something that's needed on very, very, very high grip circuits. Basically what the Ackerman angle does, when you got your steering, you've obviously got the inside wheel there and the outside wheel is there, okay? If you change the Ackerman angle, what it does, it makes the outside wheel less steering. So when you've got a very high grip situation, there's a lot less chance of the front digging in to roll the car. When the car rolls, it's always the front of the car that causes it to roll, never the rear. So the Ackerman angle on a very high grip situation, you change the Ackerman angle so that you've still got the same steering on the inside, but the outside one isn't as vicious. Consequently, it's not going to dig in; it's going to ride there.
And the way it's effective and the way it's important in situations is basically if you've got a track where most tracks you have kind of long sweeping corners and you short kind of bitey corners that you need that kind of initial steering. And it's always a balance of trying to find a good steering between the initial steering for small corners and the steering for long corners. So, like for example, in past experiences, like actually here at the Euros, we were using like an older tyre on the front. So when you went around the sweeper, you didn't have steering on that sweeper because it was burning out on the front. What could have been done instead was you could have changed the Ackerman angle so that you still had the steering on the small corners so that it was still turning in on the inside. But then on the long sweeping corners, that one, it wasn't going in as much, so it wasn't as positive steering on the long corners.
And the Ackerman angle is changed by the position of the steering arm on your...
And again, it's something that it's on the minis, so you can play around with it. And say, come in, go out. If your car feels great and it feels balanced and it feels good, because that's always when you want to really test something, is when your car feels easy to drive. And when your car feels easy to drive, you can then go, okay, I'll just change the position. You don't know what it's going to do in terms of outright performance, but it gives you an idea of how different the car will feel, and over time you will then kind of think, okay, you'll gain experience, you'll gain a bit more knowledge, and you will automatically know what to change a little bit better. So always, again, it's like everything, always feel free to play around, and on the minis it has that option, so play around with it, it's always there. Next we'll go into rear toe.
Towing on the rear?
Yeah.
Towing on the rear is basically, as most people know, it's the adjustment to bring the toe in, positive more or less towing. That's quite, some cars it's quite crucial with, in this car it's very crucial. Basically you're talking about a grip level. Ideally coming out of a corner, and where it really notices, if you're coming out of a corner and you haven't got steering, the car's pushing, you don't automatically think, oh, I'll change the steering on the front because I'm one more coming out. If you reduce the towing on the rear, as you're coming out the corner and put the power on, the rear will just slide, that will give you your steering. So you don't need to touch the front end. You can get that final part of the corner to get the car round by adjusting the towing.
Yeah, and that's why, as I said, it comes back down to making sure that you have the balance between the front grip and the rear grip. So you will know that when you're coming around the corner, over time you'll learn this, so when you're coming around the corner, that if the rear isn't running with the front, isn't kind of going, okay, we'll go around this corner together and we'll get it perfect. If the rear isn't doing that, if the rear is going, okay, I want to stay here, I don't want to move with you, If the rear is saying that, it means you need to just loosen the rear toe in a little bit, just a tiny bit. Most cars you can adjust it just 1 mil, 2 mil, a tiny bit, and you will feel the difference. So you don't need to change it a whole lot. And obviously it comes into play and always comes into conjunction with every other part of the setup. But as I said, once you have an idea in terms of your car, it's easy to drive. Check and change your rear toe in so you get an idea of what it does to your car performance, always, and then it gives you a better idea of what the change does.
And it's very, very, very variable. I mean, at the circuit we race out in Ireland, we're only running, I suppose, about a 1 degree toe in on the rear. Here we're on 3.
Yeah.
So it's such a big difference. And it will vary on every circuit you go to, it's going to be different. It will never be the same.
Next is rear shock position, as you were asking.
Yeah, rear shock position, again, you can adjust the tops, well, on ours, up or down. Again, the higher it is, the more tighter it will be, and then the lower it is, the softer it will be. It's going to be vary circuit to circuit.
Yeah, usually, at least for us, usually on most circuits, we don't really need to change your rear shock position. That's it, it's set. And then you change your rear grip in accordance to either tires or the rear toe-in. Here, it's honestly the best example, and it's one of the luckiest tracks. Not luckiest, it's unlucky for actual driving, but it's really lucky for you to play around the setup, because it's a track that you need to really mess around with the setup. And like, we changed the shock position on our car, at least here, and it's made a difference, and it's one of the first times we've had to do it in a long while. And as he said, you change the rear shock position on the top at least, or in general, either from the top or the bottom. You put it up, it's not going to move down on the rear as much, so you're not going to have as much rear grip coming out of the corner, because it's not going to lean into the rear tire as much. But if you have it down softer a bit more, it's going to mean it's going to lean down on the rear tire a bit more, and it's just going to give it a bit more grip, and it's just going to help on especially here, it's helped it a lot, big time.